After being reborn, I quietly cut all ties with my husband, Nathaniel Cole. I go to work alone. I watch movies alone. Even when I cook, I only make enough for one. All because in my last life, I had married him only to be neglected for 40 years. At the very end, he coldly pulled the oxygen tube from me, spitting out words filled with hatred. If I had a choice, I never would have married you. I died in pain filled with resentment. When I open my eyes again, my mother is speaking to me and my sister. According to the marriage agreement, one of you has to marry Nathaniel. Which one of you will it be? I'm just about to refuse when my sister, Catherine Brown, steps forward. She shoots me a contemptuous glance and says, "Mom, I'll marry him. Mom, I'll marry Nathaniel." Hearing Catherine Brown's words, both my mother, Amethyst, Lo and I froze in shock. By all logic, since I was still single as the older sister, I should have been the one to marry Nathaniel Cole. I never expected Catherine to step forward on her own. My mother glanced at me, clearly wanting my opinion. "Bella, don't you have anything to say? Weren't you and Nathaniel seeing each other? I heard that he walked you to work every day." I was struggling to find the right words, when Catherine's sharp laugh cut straight through my thoughts. "Mom, how can Nathaniel possibly be dating Bella? He only helps her because of me. I'm the one he likes." A loud buzzing rang in my head. It was as if something inside me snapped. Memories that had never made sense from my last life came flooding back. Before I had died, Nathaniel had written one final line in his journal. "If you have a choice, never marry someone you don't love." So the one he loved was Catherine, wasn't it? In my last life, he always used me as an excuse, saying he was accompanying me back home. But looking back now, he just needed a reason to see Catherine. Every time he came back from a business trip, he'd bring 2 identical sets of clothes. One for me and one for Catherine. Once I'd asked him why he always bought us the same outfits, and why he couldn't choose something different. He brushed me off flatly. I was too lazy to look at other styles. It was only now that I finally understood it wasn't laziness. He had seen me as nothing more than her stand-in. And I had lived like that for 40 years. The woman he had wanted all along wasn't me. It was Catherine. My mother's face was filled with shock, her eyes quickly shifting to me. I forced myself to stay calm, closing my eyes to hide the shock and the storm inside me. It seemed that Catherine had been reborn, too. Otherwise, how could she so confidently declare that Nathaniel loved her? After all, I was the one who had spent the most time with him. To everyone else, he would be her brother-in-law. I was just about to speak when the door slammed open. Nathaniel walked in and stopped right in front of Catherine, his eyes overflowing with tenderness. "Mrs. Brown, I'm here today to propose to Catherine. I fell deeply in love with her from the very first moment I saw her. Please let us be together." His gaze locked with Catherine. No words were spoken, but the tension between them was undeniable. Chuck hit me so hard I bit my lip, my nails digging into my palms until I nearly drew blood. Even though I had known in my last life that he never loved me, watching him propose to Catherine still felt like someone had ripped my heart out. I opened my mouth ready to speak. "Mom, shut up." Nathaniel turned his head toward me, his face stripped of all warmth. It was cold, merciless. Eyes were the same ones that had watched me die, without a shred of pity. "Bella, I've already told you I don't love you. The only reason I ever treated you well was because of Catherine. In this life, even if I never marry at all, I will never marry you." I felt like someone had slashed my throat open, leaving a gaping wound. "Mom, why not just let Catherine marry Nathaniel and fulfill the agreement between our families?" Catherine lifted her chin smugly looking at me. "Finally, you know your place." I didn't say another word, but inside I was already torn apart. Seeing them now, I realized they must have been entangled long before. And I had been a fool left in the dark all along. After that day, I moved into Briarwood Manor by myself. Cole residence wasn't far from the Brown residence. They weren't on the same street, but were close enough that running into each other was always possible, since I had chosen to give up the marriage agreement with Nathaniel. In this life, I needed to cut things off completely and avoid unnecessary contact. On my first day back at Briarwood Manor, I started cleaning. I didn't expect to find the old marriage agreement tucked away in one of the cabinets. It was the Cole family who had someone write it up years ago. The agreement had been set here in this very house. 2 crooked, childish names were scrolled across it. Mine and Nathaniel's. Back then. We were still little. When I had accidentally found out about the engagement between our families, I told him about it. He had pounded his chest and swore up that he'd marry me. So I secretly wrote our names on it. Thinking for a moment, I crossed out my name and replaced it with Catherine's. And I sent the agreement back to the Brown residence and handed it directly to Catherine. She curled her lip and said mockingly, "I never thought you were so good at securing a match." Without the people involved even knowing about it. Despite knowing that she was deliberately mocking me, I held back my temper. I turned to leave. But she grabbed my arm. "Nathaniel's taking me to dinner. Why don't you come with us so he can admire your little masterpiece?" I stayed silent. In my past life, Nathaniel had never once taken me out to eat, saying it was a waste of money. One year on his birthday, I booked a table at a restaurant hoping to make him happy. Various dishes were arranged neatly on it. But instead of a word of praise, I got cursed out, accused of being wasteful. My fists clenched tight. I shook off Catherine's hand and turned to leave the Brown residence. I hadn't gone far when I ran straight into Nathaniel. He was carrying an emerald bracelet, smiling so wide he didn't even notice me. "Catherine, look at this bracelet. Do you like it? I bought it just for you." That one simple sentence made me clench my jaw. In my past life, I had liked that very same bracelet. But he had refused to buy it, saying it was too expensive. But now he was smiling ear to ear while presenting it to Catherine. "I get employee discounts on it. It's no big deal." One comparison after another pressed down on me like a boulder. And I quickened my steps to leave. But it seemed he had noticed the marriage agreement in Catherine's hands. His face froze and he asked instinctively, "Where did you get that?" Catherine gave a short laugh, her voice dripping with scorn. "My stupid sister gave it to me." He immediately lifted his head in a panic. But I had already turned the corner and disappeared by then. The next morning, I went to work. In the past, Nathaniel would walk me to my workplace. As I was always busy, I cherished those moments we spent alone together. Seeing me arrive alone, one of my colleagues teased, "Where's that boyfriend of yours today?" I smiled faintly. "Don't joke with me, Lucy. He's not my boyfriend, but my brother-in-law. He and my sister are getting married soon. So I won't trouble him anymore." The words had barely left my mouth when I heard Nathaniel's and Catherine's voices, not far away. I quickly ducked into a corner and heard him asking in surprise, "Where's Bella? Why isn't she here?" But Catherine just pulled him along carelessly. "Maybe she's busy. Come on. Let's go get something to eat." By the time I came back, the two of them were gone, swallowed by the crowd. What I didn't expect was that he would circle back. Luckily, I was in the middle of drawing customers to look at goods. I spotted him immediately. He raised his voice and called my name, "Bella." I didn't answer. By the time he pushed his way through, I had already vanished into the sea of people. That night after work, I returned to Briarwood Manor. I hadn't even gotten the chance to rest before my mother dragged me back to the Brown residence, saying it was time to start preparing Catherine's wedding. Her wedding with Nathaniel was set for next month. And there was still so much to do. They had to choose her wedding dress and shoes, order the flowers and finalize the venue. They even needed to pick out suits for the groomsmen and dresses for the bridal party. I frowned immediately, and Catherine caught it. She crossed her arms and shot me an impatient look. "Bella Brown, are you that unwilling to do a little work?" Every time she was upset, she'd call me by my full name. In the past, I'd always swallowed it, telling myself she was my younger sister. But this time I didn't feel like giving in. I answered flatly, "I have work tomorrow. I don't have time." It was an excuse, but also the truth. I turned to leave the room. Just then, a series of knocks came from the door. "Bella, are you home?" I knew that familiar voice belonged to Nathaniel. He was probably here to ask why I ignored him today. I glanced at Catherine and said lightly, "You go open it. I'm leaving." As I walked out, I heard his low voice from the courtyard. "Catherine, where's Bella? I haven't seen her these past few days." "Nathaniel. Why are you asking about her? I'm your fiancé now. Are you still in love with her?" His voice caught. After a long pause, He finally said slowly, "Of course not. It's just I haven't seen her in a while. And there's something I wanted to ask." I didn't hear the rest. Back at Briarwood Manor, I focused on getting my goods ready for tomorrow's work. I didn't expect him to actually show up at my door before dawn. Heavy knocking echoed through the manor. I frowned and peeked quietly out the window. Seeing it was Nathaniel, I chose to ignore him. No one's home. But if Bella isn't here, where else could she be? He knew me well and knew there were only a few places I ever went. It wasn't until daylight fully broke that he finally left. With frustration. By then, it was already past 7 a.m. I'd already lost the will to go to work. So I grabbed my bag and hopped on the bus into the city. In my last life, I rarely ever came downtown. Nathaniel thought wandering around was nothing but a sign of idleness. My days have been nothing more than endless trips between home and work. At the shopping mall, I ran straight into him and Catherine. They were carrying armfuls of things for the wedding. And I overheard Catherine complaining about me. "Bella is so petty. She's just jealous that you're marrying me. That's why she won't help prepare the wedding." Nathaniel's face was unreadable, giving away nothing of what he was really thinking. I lowered my head trying to avoid them. But then unexpectedly, he called my name under his breath, "Bella." I hurried my steps, bought a movie ticket on a whim and ducked into the newly opened theater. The movie turned out to be some cheesy romance. The place was packed with couples, which only made me feel even more out of place sitting there by myself. Not long after I settled in, I caught Catherine's voice close by. "Nathaniel, what are you thinking about? You're not even paying attention to the movie." My whole body stiffened. I could feel his gaze searching the seats behind me. He let out a soft sigh and murmured, "Was I really just seeing things?" I slipped out of the theater before the movie even ended. After making sure no one was following me, I wandered around until nightfall before finally taking the bus home. On the road leading back to Briarwood Manor, I suddenly noticed a long shadow stretched across the ground. The gravel road leading back to Briarwood Manor was always dark at this hour. The street lamps were spaced too far apart, casting long, shivering pools of yellow light on the damp asphalt. I walked slowly, my boots clicking softly against the ground. The quietness of the night usually brought me comfort, a stark contrast to the endless, suffocating silence of my past life, where every corner of the house had been filled with the invisible weight of Nathaniel's coldness. But tonight, the silence felt heavy. As I neared the old oak tree marking the boundary of the manor, I saw it. A long, distorted shadow stretched across the ground, reaching toward my feet. My heart didn't leap, it simply sank into a familiar, dull ache. I stopped walking. Nathaniel stood beneath the flickering lamp, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He wasn't wearing his usual pristine suit jacket. Instead, his collar was turned up against the damp wind, and his hair was slightly disheveled. In his right hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. It was the marriage agreement I had returned to the Brown residence earlier that day, the one where I had crossed out my name and written Catherine's in its place. "You're late," he said. His voice was rough, stripped of the smooth, polite tone he always used when others were around. "It's past 9, I replied flatly, keeping my distance. "I have no obligation to be home at any specific time." "Why are you here, Nathaniel? You should be with Catherine." He took a step forward, his eyes burning with a strange, turbulent light. He held up the crumpled paper. "What is the meaning of this, Bella?" Catherine gave this to me. She laughed about it. "But I want to hear it from you. Why did you cross your name out? Is it not obvious?" I looked at him, my expression blank. "The agreement says one of the Brown sisters must marry into the Cole family. Catherine wants to marry you. You want to marry Catherine." I simply corrected a historical clerical error. "You should be thanking me." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck tightened, and for a moment, he looked exactly as he did in my past life when I had displeased him, cold, impatient, and utterly dismissive. "Don't play games with me," he hissed, stepping closer. "You've been avoiding me 4 weeks. You don't look at me when we pass each other. You don't answer my knocks. Is this some kind of cheap trick to make me feel guilty? To make Catherine feel like she's stealing me from you?" I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat, dry and bitter. 40 years. I had spent 40 years trying to guess what he wanted, trying to mold myself into the perfect, quiet wife who never asked for too much, who never complained when he stayed out late or looked through me as if I were made of glass. And even now, reborn into a new life, his first instinct was to assume everything I did was a calculated play for his attention. Nathaniel, I said, my voice remarkably steady. You are overestimating your importance to me. What did you say? I don't want you, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I don't want the marriage agreement. I don't want the Cole family. And I certainly do not want to play games. I am handing you exactly what you've always wanted on a silver platter. Take Catherine, get married, and leave me out of your life. He stared at me, his eyes widening slightly. He searched my face for a trace of hesitation, a flicker of the old devotion he was so used to exploiting. But there was nothing. The girl who used to wait by the gate just to catch a glimpse of him walking down the street was gone. She had died in a hospital bed. Watching him coldly detach her life support. You're lying, he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. He reached out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. The moment his skin touched mine, a violent jolt of revulsion went through my body. The memory of his cold hands on the oxygen tube flashed before my eyes. I flinched back so violently that my sleeve tore slightly as I ripped my wrist from his grasp. Don't touch me, I gasped, my voice trembling with a sudden, uncontrollable rage. Nathaniel froze, his hand remaining suspended in the air. The sheer disgust on my face seemed to shock him more than my words ever could. He stumbled back a half step, his brow furrowing in confusion and a strange, creeping hurt. Bella. Go home, Nathaniel, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If you ever come near Briarwood Manor again, I will have the lock on the gate changed, and I will call the police. We have nothing to say to each other. Without waiting for his response, I walked past him. I didn't run, but my steps were quick and deliberate. I unlocked the heavy iron gate of the manor, stepped inside, and pushed it shut behind me. The heavy metal lock clicked into place with a definitive, echoing thud. Through the bars of the gate, I could see him still standing under the street lamp, a solitary figure holding a ruined piece of paper, staring at the closed gates as if he had just lost something he hadn't even realized he owned. The following weeks were a blur of activity, but none of it involved me. At the Brown residence, the wedding preparations were in full swing. My mother, Amethyst, was completely consumed by the event. She spent her days arguing with florists, tasting catering menus, and complaining about the rising costs of silk drapes. Catherine, meanwhile, treated the upcoming wedding like her personal coronation. She demanded the finest of everything, completely ignoring the fact that our family's finances were not as robust as they used to be. I kept my distance, working extra hours at the store and spending my evenings alone at Briarwood Manor. I cooked simple meals, a single bowl of noodles, a small portion of stir-fried vegetables. I ate in silence, listening to the rain tap against the windowpane. It was lonely, yes, but it was a clean, peaceful kind of loneliness. It didn't have the poisonous sting of waiting for a husband who would never return my affection. One afternoon, my mother practically dragged herself into Briarwood Manor. She looked exhausted, her hair slightly disheveled and her face pale. Bella, she sighed, collapsing onto my modest sofa. You have to talk to your sister. She's losing her mind. She wants a 5-tier cake imported from the capital, and she's demanding that Nathaniel's family pay for the entire reception at the Grand Palace Hotel. The Coles are furious. I poured her a cup of plain warm water and set it on the table. Mom, that is between Catherine and Nathaniel. I have nothing to do with their wedding. But you're her older sister. Amethyst cried, looking at me with pleading eyes. Nathaniel used to listen to you. Whenever he was stubborn about something, you talked to him, and he'd soften up. If you just talk to him, tell him to accommodate Catherine a little. No, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. I will not speak to Nathaniel on Catherine's behalf. If she wants a lavish wedding, she needs to negotiate with her fiancé herself. I am busy with my own work. Amethyst stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and resentment. Bella, what has gotten into you lately? You've become so cold. In the past, you were always the first to help. You'd sacrifice anything for this family. Now, you act like we're strangers. Maybe I've just realized that sacrifice doesn't buy happiness, Mom, I said, looking out the window. I spent too long living for other people. I'm tired. She let out a frustrated huff, realizing she wouldn't get what she wanted from me. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Fine. If you want to be selfish, be selfish. But don't expect us to help you when you're old and alone. She left, slamming the door behind her. I didn't mind the silence that returned to the house was a welcome friend. Meanwhile, at the Cole residence, things were not as harmonious as Catherine wanted the world to believe. A few days later, while delivering a batch of embroidered linens to a boutique downtown, I passed by the high-end jewelry store where Nathaniel had bought the emerald bracelet. Through the glass window, I saw them. Catherine was pointing demandingly at a massive diamond ring in the display case, her face pinched in a scowl. Nathaniel stood beside her, but he wasn't looking at the ring. His face was pale, his eyes dark with exhaustion. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. As Catherine kept talking, waving her hands dramatically, Nathaniel's gaze drifted. He looked out the window, his eyes scanning the busy street. Our eyes met. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to stop. The noise of the street faded. I saw the sudden, desperate flash of recognition in his eyes, followed by a look of profound, silent pleading. He took a step toward the door, his hand unconsciously reaching out. But before he could move, Catherine noticed his distraction. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back with a sharp tug, her lips moving rapidly as she scolded him for ignoring her. I didn't wait to see the rest. I turned my head, adjusted the strap of my delivery bag, and walked quickly into the crowd. I remembered a similar afternoon in my past life. I had walked past that very jewelry store with Nathaniel. I had stopped to look at a simple, modest silver band, admiring its delicate design. Nathaniel had glanced at it, scoffed, and said, "Don't look at things we can't afford, Bella. It's unsightly to beg with your eyes." I had quickly lowered my head, feeling deeply ashamed of my own greed. Now, he was being forced to buy diamonds he couldn't afford for a woman who didn't care about his financial limits. It was a strange, hollow kind of justice. As the weeks ticked down toward the wedding, a strange rumor began to circulate through our small town. People said that Nathaniel Cole was losing his mind. He was seen wandering the streets late at night, standing outside Briarwood Manor for hours, staring at the dark windows. His work at the family firm was suffering. He had made several critical errors on shipping manifests, costing his family a significant amount of money. I tried to ignore the gossip, focusing entirely on my plans to leave. I knew that as long as I stayed in this town, I would always be tied to them. The shadow of my past life would continue to loom over me. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere where the air didn't taste like old resentment and dead dreams. I had applied for a transfer to a branch of our trading company in the coastal city of Sunderley, 3 hours away by train. It was a bustling port city, full of new people, new opportunities, and most importantly, no Nathaniel Cole. The transfer had been approved, and I was scheduled to leave the day after the wedding. One evening, while packing my few belongings into a worn leather suitcase, I found an old, dusty leather notebook tucked behind the bookshelf. My heart skipped a beat. It was Nathaniel's journal. Not his current one, but an old diary from our teenage years that he had left at Briarwood Manor years ago when we were still friends. I had kept it safe, treating it like a holy relic. I hesitated, then opened it to a random page. The handwriting was youthful, slightly messy. "Bella brought me some wild berries from the woods today." She had scratches all over her hands, but she was smiling so bright. "She's so stupidly clumsy." I told her to go away, but she just laughed and gave me the sweetest ones. I wish she'd stop bothering me. But the berries were good. I turned the page. "Catherine is beautiful. Everyone says so." She wore a red ribbon in her hair today, and all the boys were looking at her. I want to be the kind of man who can stand beside someone like Catherine. Bella is just Bella. She's always There, like the old oak tree in the yard. You don't think about the tree until it's gone, I suppose. But it's always just there. I closed the notebook slowly. He had always seen me as a permanent fixture, a background prop in the grand play of his life. I was the safety net, the quiet warmth he could return to after chasing the bright, flashy lights of the world. And because I had always been there, he had assumed I always would be. He had treated my love like an endless resource, something he could deplete without ever having to replenish it. A sudden knock on the door broke the silence. It wasn't the loud, demanding knock of my mother or the furious pounding of Catherine. It was a hesitant, rhythmic tapping. I walked to the window and looked down. Nathaniel was standing in the courtyard. The rain was pouring down, soaking through his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. He stood there, his head bowed, looking utterly broken. I opened the window slightly, the cool, damp air rushing into the room. Nathaniel. What are you doing here? It's past midnight. He lifted his head. In the dim light, I could see that his face was pale and drawn. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his lips were trembling slightly from the cold. Bella, he said, his voice cracking. Please. Just, let me talk to you for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. We have nothing to discuss, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet courtyard. Go home to Catherine. I don't want Catherine, he burst out, his voice raw with a sudden, desperate emotion that startled me. He took a step toward the porch, his hands clenched into fists. I don't want her, Bella. I've been having these dreams. Every night. I can't sleep. I can't breathe. My hand tightened on the window frame. Dreams? I dream of a hospital, he whispered, his eyes fixed on mine, filled with a terrifying, wild confusion. A white room. The smell of medicine. There's an old woman in the bed. She looks like you, but she's older, so much older. She's dying. And I'm standing there, Bella. I'm standing there, and I feel so much anger. I pull a tube. I pull it, and then there's nothing. Just this horrible, suffocating emptiness. I wake up screaming every night, Bella. My chest feels like it's being crushed. He took another step closer, his face upturned to the rain. Why am I having these dreams? Why does it feel so real? Why does it feel like I've already lost you, even though you're right here? The silence that followed was deafening, save for the steady drumbeat of the rain. He was remembering. The weight of his past life sins was bleeding through the fabric of time, clawing its way into his subconscious. The soul remembers what the mind tries to forget. I looked down at him, this man who had torturing me for 40 years, who had ended my life with a final act of utter cruelty. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph, a sense of satisfaction at seeing him suffer. But I felt nothing. No anger. No hatred. Only a profound, heavy tiredness. They aren't just dreams, Nathaniel, I said softly. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. What? In another life, you got exactly what you wanted, I said, my voice calm, drifting down through the rain like a eulogy. You married me because of the agreement. You ignored me for 40 years. You treated me like a ghost in my own home. You bought me clothes only to make me look like Catherine. And at the very end, when I was sick and dying, you pulled my oxygen tube. You told me you hated me. Nathaniel's eyes stretched wide in sheer horror. He shook his head slowly, his face turning an ash-gray color. No, that's impossible. That's a nightmare. I would never. I couldn't. You did, I said. And now, in this life, you have your choice. You don't have to marry me. You have Catherine. You can have the life you always wanted, free of the woman you hated so much. No, he screamed, the sound tearing from his throat. He lunged toward the front door, throwing his weight against it, pounding furiously on the heavy wood. Bella. Open the door. Please, Bella. I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it. I was blind. I was a fool. Please, don't leave me. Don't look at me like that. I didn't answer. I stepped back from the window and closed it, locking it tight. I drew the heavy curtains, shutting out the sight of him. The pounding on the door continued for a long time, accompanied by his desperate, sobbing apologies. But to me, the noise felt miles away. I sat on my bed, pulled my knees to my chest, and waited. Eventually, the pounding stopped. The only sound left was the quiet, peaceful falling of the rain. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and clear. The sun shone down on the town, as if celebrating a grand occasion, but the air inside the Brown residence was thick enough to choke on. Catherine sat in front of the vanity mirror, her wedding dress a massive, glittering cloud of silk and lace. But her face was twisted in a furious scowl. "Where is he?" she shrieked, throwing her hairbrush against the wall. It shattered into pieces. "The ceremony starts in 1 hour. Why isn't Nathaniel here? Why isn't he answering his phone?" My mother was pacing the floor, her hands shaking. I called his mother. She said he left the house hours ago. She thought he was already at the church. Catherine turned her glaring eyes toward me. I was standing near the door, dressed in a simple, faded blue dress, holding my suitcase. My train to Sunderland left in 2 hours. I had only come to say a final goodbye to my mother, not out of love, but out of a sense of duty to close this chapter of my life completely. "It's you, isn't it?" Catherine hissed, marching over to me, her heavy skirts rustling loudly. "You did something to him. You've been whispering in his ear, trying to ruin my day because you're jealous." "Catherine, be quiet," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I haven't spoken to Nathaniel since the night he came to my door. I am leaving for Sunderland today. I have no interest in your wedding, your husband, or your life." "You're lying," she screamed, her face flushed with rage. "He's been acting like a ghost. He looks at me like he hates me. On the night we picked out the rings, he looked at me and said he wished he had never proposed. He said I was selfish. Me. After everything I did for him." I looked at Catherine, seeing the raw, ugly insecurity hidden beneath her expensive makeup. In our past life, she had lived a comfortable, pampered life, always knowing she had Nathaniel's unspoken devotion while I bore the brunt of his bitterness. Now, without me to act as the shield, without me to absorb his cruelty and frustration, all of that toxic energy had been directed straight at her. They hadn't even married yet, and they were already destroying each other. "You wanted him, Catherine," I said softly. "You stepped forward. You took the agreement. He is all yours. I hope you enjoy the life you've built." Before she could speak, the front door of the house burst open. My mother gasped. Catherine spun around, her face instantly lighting up with a desperate hope. "Nathaniel." But the man who walked into the room looked nothing like a groom. Nathaniel was wearing his wedding suit, but the tie was gone, the collar of his shirt torn open. He was drenched in sweat, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He didn't look at Catherine. He didn't look at my mother. His eyes locked onto me, and the worn leather suitcase in my hand. "Bella," he breathed, his voice trembling. He took a step toward me, ignoring Catherine entirely. "You're leaving. You're actually leaving. Nathaniel." Catherine screamed, grabbing his arm. "What is the meaning of this? Look at me. I am your bride. The guests are waiting at the church." Nathaniel slowly turned his head to look at her. The look in his eyes was so cold, so filled with a deep, visceral disgust, that Catherine involuntarily let go of his arm and took a step back. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice flat and dead. "I don't want to marry you, Catherine. I never did. I was using you. I was using you to run away from what I felt for Bella. Because I was too arrogant, too stupid to admit that the only warmth in my life came from her." "Nathaniel, no," my mother cried, stepping forward. "You can't do this. The agreement. The agreement is null and void," Nathaniel said, his eyes shifting back to me. He fell to his knees, right there on the dusty floor, his expensive suit trousers gathering dirt. He reached out, trying to grab the hem of my dress, but I stepped back, out of his reach. "Bella, please," he sobbed, tears finally streaming down his pale cheeks. I remember everything. I remember the hospital. I remember the coldness. I remember the 40 years of ignoring you. I was a monster. I was a horrible, blind monster. But please, give me one chance. Just one chance to make it right. I will spend the rest of this life serving you. I will do whatever you want. Just don't leave me in this dark. I looked down at him, kneeling at my feet, weeping like a child. 40 years of neglect. 40 years of cold looks, of silent dinners, of feeling like a ghost in my own home. 40 years of wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough, why he hated me so much. And now, here he was, begging for my forgiveness. But the strange thing was, looking at him now, I didn't feel any satisfaction. I didn't feel the warmth of revenge. I just felt free. Nathaniel, I said, my voice quiet, carrying no anger, no malice. I forgave you a long time ago. Not for your sake, but for mine. Because carrying hatred for you is too heavy a burden, and I want to travel light. A flash of hope appeared in his eyes. Bella, does that mean? It means, I interrupted, that I am leaving. I am leaving this town, I am leaving this family, and I am leaving you. Your punishment isn't my hatred, Nathaniel. Your punishment is that you have to live with what you did, and you have to do it without me. I looked at my mother one last time. Goodbye, Mom. I turned to Catherine, who was standing frozen, her face pale, her beautiful wedding dress suddenly looking like a ridiculous, heavy costume. Goodbye, Catherine. I hope you find what you're looking for. I picked up my suitcase, stepped past the kneeling, broken man who had once been my husband, and walked out the door. The train ride to Sunderley was long, but for the first time in my life, I didn't mind the travel. I watched the scenery change through the window, the dusty, gray hills of my hometown giving way to green fields, and finally, to the vast, sparkling blue of the ocean. The air that drifted through the open window tasted of salt and endless possibility. When I arrived at Sunderley, I found a small, modest apartment near the harbor. It had a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a balcony that looked out over the water. I set about building my new life. I worked hard at the trading company, and within a year, my dedication was noticed. I was promoted to manager of the export department. I made friends, real friends, who liked me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I went to the cinema alone on Friday nights, buying a large tub of popcorn and sitting right in the middle of the theater, laughing and crying without worrying about anyone judging me. On Sundays, I walked down to the fish market, bought a single fresh fish, and cooked a quiet, delicious meal for one. I ate it on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I occasionally received letters from home, though I rarely opened them. From the few I did read, I learned that the wedding between Catherine and Nathaniel had never happened. Nathaniel had refused to go to the church, leaving Catherine standing at the altar in front of the entire town. The scandal had ruined the Brown family's reputation, and Catherine had eventually moved away to a small, distant town, bitter and alone. Nathaniel, meanwhile, had stepped down from his family's firm. He lived like a recluse in his family's old country house, refusing to see anyone. People said he spent his days sitting by the window, looking out at the road, waiting for a shadow that would never return. One evening, as I was walking along the beach, the cool wet sand squeezing between my toes, I stopped to watch the tide come in. The waves crashed gently against the shore, washing away the footprints I had left behind. I took a deep breath of the salty air, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on my face. For 40 years, I had lived in a cold, dark winter. But now, finally, the ice had melted. I turned around and walked back toward my brightly lit apartment, my heart light, my mind at peace, and my future entirely my own.